So the expectation for the trip personally was I was going there as a media research team with two other girls to film and do videography of the Gaelic speaking regions. I had no idea what that was exactly. I kind of thought that was all of Ireland, but it pertains mainly to the West Coast, so the coast facing America basically is more Gaelic speaking. What I was told before we went was we were going to be laying the groundwork for other missionaries. One thing that I'm horrible at is sleeping on the way to a trip. And even when I went to China last year, it was a 14-hour plane ride and I didn't sleep once. So I kind of went into this knowing that I was going to be wide awake. My plane landed around 8 a.m. and you know, for the first like 2 hours, all of us were just like, yes, you know, like this is gonna be great. We ended up going to a castle. It was huge, it was beautiful. I mean, when you think of Europe, you're like, oh, castles and, you know, all that pretty stuff. When we went to the castle, at first I was just like, picture, 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 picture. And then like halfway through the monstrous hike of walking this castle with no sleep, we suddenly turned into an episode of The Walking Dead. And I've never seen it before, but I'm assuming that's what they look like. I knew going into the trip it wasn't gonna be like my other trips. I knew I wasn't gonna be there to intentionally just build relationships. And it had its pros and cons. We got to travel a lot more than the other teams did. We got to go to a few different places that we would have never gotten to go to had we stayed in a certain location. And the con of that was, you know, we weren't there long enough to build that close of a relationship. And it was difficult. I mean, when you go on a mission trip, I personally think I'm gonna build on these people and love on them. And so having to go through the day and just sort of know that person, it was hard. When you think of Ireland, and when I thought of Ireland, you think predominantly Catholic or Protestant, especially with the war that went on during the 70s. I had actually done a lot of research about that before I left, just because I thought, okay, I'm going to meet either Catholic people or Protestant people, and I need to sort of be able to handle that. What shocked me was in the past 20 or 30 years, the church had been involved in a lot of scandals, especially involving children. And I was not prepared for all the stuff that I learned that the church had done. It was really heartbreaking because when you think of the church, you think, or you want it to be a safe place, judgment-free, and these people had been abused by a place that they had entrusted themselves with. So when I went to Ireland, I found that people would say they're Catholic, or say they're Protestant, or even say they're Christian, but church was sort of non-existent for them. So the older generation has stopped going, kind of, and with that, they've taught the younger generations, this is what the church did, so you shouldn't go. It's not even the fact that the younger generation has had issues with the church. They haven't been enough to have issues with it. As a photographer, getting to see abandoned buildings often makes me kind of excited because it has that look to it that sometimes you can get really cool shots. The disheartening part of it was a lot of the abandoned buildings were churches. A lot of churches have just sort of been left to decay, whether that be they no longer needed them, they had another one, or they just left it in general. Showed how far they've strayed. I did experience spiritual darkness. As someone who was raised in the church, I've learned about it pretty much my entire life. But until you're in the midst of it, until you're fighting it, you don't realize the toll that it takes. I had two other girls on my team, and it took all three of us to sort of just get out of bed in the morning, you know, tell each other jokes, make sure we're laughing, make sure we're in the Word, make sure we have worship music playing, just sort of keeping us upbeat. But at the end of the day, you could tell the exhaustion was just settling in. And it was easy to just stay in our room and not go out. The only way I can describe it so that one could see it as a picture is just a dark blanket just sort of thrown on top of you. Taking any visible light out of your view, it's really heavy. It doesn't keep you warm. You're still cold with the blanket on. I would call my mom a few times, and I was ready to break down crying because the heaviness of that blanket just kept getting heavier and heavier, and I still couldn't see any light. And it broke my heart because the people that I'd meet, the people I'd see at the grocery store, or the guys that I'd meet at the pub, or the lady that served me coffee at the cafe, they lived under that blanket. And they didn't know they were under it. And it broke my heart to think that they may never hear that they're under a blanket. They may never know that they're being sort of kept from the light. And it's a massive lie that the enemy has told them. And they were born in it, they grow up in it, and they die in it. And there were a few times, I'll be completely honest, that week, that I wish I didn't know I was under a blanket. Knowing makes the blanket 10 times heavier. And by the end of the week, I was exhausted. I was ready to just move on and hope that we saw something else. But the other half of me was like, I can't leave them. I still think about them every day. And knowing that most of them are gonna die under that blanket, it makes leaving just a little harder. And when I tell people, you know, I experienced spiritual darkness, they're like, oh, okay. It was a truly horrifying moment when I realized these people have heard the gospel. They've just heard the wrong version of it. And it's distorted and mixed up, and they don't like it because it's not redeeming, it's not full of grace, it's not hopeful, and it's not love. It's harmful and it's full of rules. And I don't blame them for not wanting it, you know? I almost wish they never heard it, so that when someone would come, it'd be new to them. I couldn't imagine, you know, living there and just begging people to understand that the gospel you were told is not the gospel that I'm giving you. The pubs is a vital part of the whole Irish sort of lifestyle. Live music would be playing every night, so I got to hear live traditional Irish music. It was a lot of fun. And then, you know, I'd be the really weird person ordering a Coke at a bar. And one thing that really discouraged me, though, is when people kind of gave me that look, like, you went into a pub, but you're a Christian, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. The only thing I could think of was Jesus ate with sinners. He didn't stray away from drunks or people that were sick or all that stuff. And, I mean, why do I have any right to do any less? So now when I see, you know, a bar or a pub, I'm just like, yeah, you guys, you know what, I'd hang out with you guys. Over there, we had to walk a lot. And I kind of was thinking this is what it was like back in Jesus's day. There were no cars, you know, you couldn't take the train to Jerusalem. There was no airplanes. While we were over there, 95% of the time we walked everywhere. And I like walking. Walking is sort of, you know, therapeutic for me. I like just going and taking in all the scenery. The second place that my team was put at was the Aran Isles. It's 3 islands off the coast of Galway. It was definitely a better week than Caro. Maybe it was just a different atmosphere, or I truly think it was because God was working, that it was a little bit lighter. The blanket was definitely not as heavy. The days that we were there, all of us sort of soaked that energy back up that we needed. It's like Superman, you know, getting in front of the sun, and it's like, okay, I'm good now. Usually, the Aran Isles is a one-day stop for tourists. They come on the 8 a.m. ferry and they leave at 4 p.m. We were staying there for 4 days, and so when people found that, they were like, oh great, you know, regulars. While we were there, we ran into this dog, and it was a sheepdog. It looked like a sheepdog, and so I needed something to call it, so I called it Lassie. It sort of led us around the island, and we were originally planning on hiking up a mountain to see the world's smallest church. We thought eventually anytime it's gonna turn around and just go back home. It just kept walking with us, and when we stopped to take pictures or videos, it just sort of stayed in the area, laid down. The dog went off to the right, and to the right is about a mile long of just rock. And it's where the old monastery used to be, and now all that's left is the very little left of the foundation. So the dog starts walking that way, and Kayla and I were like, yeah, let's go, you know, because we're all for climbing things and hiking on things, and my poor other teammate, Maddie, had a heart attack a few times because we would just trespass and do all this stuff and sit on the edge of cliffs. And we get to what is now my favorite place in all of Ireland. I know I didn't get to see all of it, but I don't think anything could beat this. You see sometimes in pictures waves crashing up against the rocks and, you know, lifting all the way up. We got to see that. It almost looked like a fortress, just going down along the cliffs. Got to climb down there, and the waves would just crash up and be like 10 feet above us and then fall down again. And we just sort of sat there and we were like, I mean, I'm sure that was our face for like probably a good 10 minutes. Lassie's with us the entire time, just sort of leading us through this just gorgeous, barren place. And the part I think we loved best is there were no people. Like no tourists, no cars. The only thing you could see is the ocean and then the rocks behind you. It was almost as if God had come and just met with us in that place. And we needed that. We so desperately needed that. And then we never saw Lassie again. And we looked for him. We saw other dogs, but we didn't see him. And I swear almost in that moment that it was just, he was our little angel that sort of just led us to a place where it's weird that it was the place, but he sort of led us to a place where we just knew everything was going to be okay. The next day, Kayla and I hiked back that evening to the cliffs, and along the way it started raining, and we're like, no. Please, God, just give us some sunshine. We just prayed that for that mile that we were walking out. And when we got there, we not only got a beautiful sunset with color, and it looked like God had painted it, we got a piece of a rainbow. And it's literally just a square. We couldn't see the bottom, we couldn't see the top. It was just a piece of the rainbow sticking out. And you know, we sat there for a few hours this time. We stayed way longer, and you know, we got footage, we got pictures and video, but for the most part, we just took it in. And the rainbow, which has now become sort of a symbol of not God's promise, a symbol of something else, it reminded me, but that is what it truly is. Seeing that rainbow, it gave me that sort of acknowledgement that I know how hard it's been, and I know you're tired, but I need you to keep going, because I'll be with you the entire time. It doesn't matter how many battles I think Satan's winning. It's a matter of he's still winning no matter what. And giving that strength back to me and sort of giving me that hope is what I truly needed. It was just God's really cool, because whenever I am at my lowest and I really need a sign, anything, he gives it to me. Every time I'm reminded, it doesn't matter if I'm adequate enough. This is God doing his work. And so when I came back from Ireland, when I felt truly empty and exhausted and all my sources were drained, that's when I knew something was done. And the enemy, I love this though, the enemy is fighting over there, and that is because God is up to something.